How many times have you watched a horror movie where one man kills 100 people and wondered if this really exists? Well, take a look at what real serial killers are capable of doing and to what extent of brutality they have gone. We are introducing to you the 10 most notorious killers of all time. Number 10 is Ed Gein. The inspiration behind Psycho. The man whose macabre and horrific acts helped inspire Psycho, Silence of the Lambs and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, grew up in an isolated area of Wisconsin. He was an abused child of an alcoholic father and a puritanical and domineering mother who instilled in her son a pathological fear of both women and sex. When his father, brother and mother died within a 5-year period, he was left alone at the family farm, where he eventually cordoned off parts of the house, turning it into a shrine, of sorts, to his mother. 13 years later, local police arrived at the farm, following up on a tip regarding missing hardware store owner Bernice Worden. They discovered Worden's headless corpse hanging upside down from the rafters. Their search of the property revealed a haul of horrors that included human body parts turned into household items such as chairs and bowls, faces used as wall hangings, and a vest made up of a human torso. Many of these gruesome items were from already dead bodies that Gein had stolen from their graves, but he had murdered one other woman, in addition to Worden. He claimed that he was using the body parts to assemble a new version of his beloved mother. Gein was diagnosed with schizophrenia and declared unfit for trial. A decade later, he was convicted of one of the murders but was declared insane at the time of the crime. He spent the rest of his life in a mental hospital. Number 9 is Harold Shipman. Dr. Death who killed 218 patients. One of history's deadliest serial killers was a married family man who managed to squeeze in 218 credited murders and as many as 250 while working as a popular British physician. Harold Shipman began his murderous spree in 1972, and it's believed he killed at least 71 patients while working at his first practice and doubled that number at a second practice he joined after butting heads with colleagues who found him arrogant, brusque and overconfident. Finally, in 1998, both a local undertaker and another doctor noticed the unusually high number of cremation certificates Shipman had signed off on. They also noticed striking similarities in the recently deceased patients themselves. The majority were elderly women who were found sitting up and fully clothed, not in bed, as would usually be the case with the gravely ill. Despite these clues, this initial investigation was shoddily handled, allowing Shipman to kill 3 more times. Shipman's luck ran out later that year when the daughter of his final victim, lawyer Kathleen Grundy, claimed he'd not only killed her mother but had also tried to create a new fake will, naming him as her sole beneficiary. Unlike his earlier victims, Grundy had not been cremated, and an autopsy revealed lethally high levels of diamorphine, the drug Shipman used for most of the killings. He was formally charged with 15 murders and was convicted and sentenced to life without parole in 2000. Shipman died in 2004 after committing suicide in his cell. He never admitted to any of the killings. Number 8 is Jeffrey Dahmer. He committed his first murder at 18. He would go on killing until his arrest in 1991 after an African-American man escaped his clutches and hailed down police near Milwaukee, Wisconsin. When the victim led police back to his captor's apartment, they discovered photographs of dismembered bodies, the severed heads and genitalia of several other men, and a tub full of acid that Dahmer had used to dispose of some of his 17 victims. Dahmer had lived a shiftless life, dropping out of college and the army and living with various family members before being kicked out by his grandmother and settling in the Milwaukee apartment. 3 years before his 1991 arrest and with several murders already under his belt, Dahmer was convicted of drugging and sexually molesting a young teenager. After serving only a year, he was released and continuing his killing binge, which focused almost entirely on young, non-white men. Dahmer's sensational trial, featuring lurid descriptions of his eating the body parts of some of his victims and admissions of necrophilia, renewed the world's interest in serial killers. In 1992, Dahmer was sentenced to 957 years in jail, but was killed by a fellow inmate just 2 years later. Number 7 is Albert Fish. Hamilton Howard Albert Fish was an American serial killer, child rapist and cannibal. When a serial killer is dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Gray Man, and the Bougie Man, it's almost certain he is thoroughly deranged. Fish was tried and found guilty of raping, killing, and cannibalizing 3 children in the early 1900s. However, he claimed that he had murdered more like 100 children and even boasted that he had children in every state. Especially deranged is the fact that Fish sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims, 10-year-old Grace Budd. The letter detailed how he had lured the little girl, strangled her, and then cut her into pieces to eat over the course of 9 days. Fish was a suspect in at least 5 murders during his lifetime. He confessed to 3 murders that police were able to trace to a known homicide, and he confessed to stabbing at least 2 other people. Fish was apprehended on December 13, 1934, and put on trial for the kidnapping and murder of Grace Budd. He was convicted and executed by electric chair on January 16, 1936, at the age of 65. His crimes were dramatized in the 2007 film The Gray Man, starring Patrick Bauchow as Fish. Number 6 is Pedro Lopez. The monster of the Andes. One of the world's most prolific serial killers might still be out there. Pedro Lopez is linked to more than 300 murders in his native Colombia and in Ecuador and Peru. Lopez said, "I like the girls in Ecuador, they are more gentle and trusting. More innocent. They never scream." At least 1/3 of those murders were tribal women. After Lopez's arrest in 1980, police found the graves of more than 50 of his preteen victims. He was later convicted of murdering 110 girls in Ecuador and confessed to 240 more murders in Colombia and Peru. The monster of the Andes didn't even spend 20 years in prison, as he was released in 1998 for good behavior. Whatever happened to Pedro Lopez is unknown. Many suspect and hope that one of the many bounties offered for his death eventually paid off and that he is dead. If Lopez has escaped his enemies and is still alive, there is little doubt that he has returned to his old ways. Number 5 is Luis Garavito, also known as the Beast. Luis Garavito is not as famous as some of his rivals here on this list, but he is the most prolific serial killer of all time. Born on January 25, 1957, La Bestia is the oldest of 7 brothers. His childhood was ruled by his father, subsequently described as both physically and emotionally abusive. Furthermore, during his trial, Garavito described being sexually abused when he was a young boy, but didn't name the perpetrator. Further details of his early life are sketchy at best. However, the details surrounding his maniacal killings is frightening. He lured children to trust and accompany him through offers of money for odd jobs, candy or drugs. All of the children were tied up, viciously tortured, raped, and were eventually killed by having their throats slashed, and many were decapitated completely. Garavito has accurately directed police investigators to the graves of more than 170 victims, encompassing large parts of Colombia. Investigators believe that Garavito is responsible for more than 400 deaths during the years prior to his capture. Garavito was captured on 22 April, 1999. He confessed to murdering 140 children. However, he is still under investigation for the murder of 172 children in more than 59 counties in Colombia. He was found guilty in 138 of the 172 cases, the others are ongoing. The sentences for these 138 cases add to 1,853 years and 9 days. Because of Colombian law restrictions. However, he cannot be imprisoned for more than 30 years. In addition, because he helped the authorities in finding the bodies, his sentence has been decreased to 22 years. Garavito is considered the worst serial killer in history for having a higher death toll than any other. Number 4 is John Wayne Gacy. The Killer Clown. To most of his suburban Chicago neighbors, John Wayne Gacy was a friendly man who threw popular block parties, volunteered in local Democratic politics, and often performed as a clown at local children's parties. But Gacy, who had already served a stint in prison for sexually assaulting a teenage boy, was hiding a horrific secret right beneath his neighbors' unseeing eyes. In 1978, when a 15-year-old boy who had last been seen with Gacy, whose construction business the teenager was hoping to work for, went missing, police obtained a search warrant for Gacy's house. There they found a class ring and clothing belonging to several young men previously reported missing. In a 4-foot crawl space beneath the house, where a penetrating odor was present, they were shocked to find the decomposing bodies of 29 boys and teenagers that Gacy had raped and murdered. Gacy's ex-wife had complained about the odor for years, but Gacy had chalked it up to moisture-causing mildew. Law enforcement also came under criticism, as the family members of several of the victims had previously pointed to Gacy as a possible suspect. In addition to the bodies found at his house, Gacy admitted to killing several additional men, disposing of their bodies in a nearby lake. His attempts at presenting an insanity defense failed, and he was convicted on 33 counts of murder and executed by lethal injection in 1994. Number 3 is Ted Bundy. The first televised murder trial. Handsome, well-educated and brimming with charm, Ted Bundy seemed the unlikeliest of serial killers, which made his decade-long, multi-state killing spree all the more surprising and to some appealing. Born to an unwed teenaged mother, Bundy never learned his father's identity and was raised believing that his grandmother was actually his mother and his mother actually his sister. Following a difficult adolescence, Bundy graduated from the University of Washington and soon embarked on his murderous spree, killing his first victim in Seattle in 1966. Focusing primarily on attractive college co-eds, Bundy committed a series of murders across the Pacific Northwest. He continued on to Utah and Colorado, killing several more women before being arrested. Despite being convicted of kidnapping, he managed to escape police custody not once, but twice, while awaiting trial in Colorado. He moved to Florida, where he killed several members of a sorority and his final victim, a 12-year-old girl who he raped and murdered. When Bundy was finally apprehended while driving a stolen car a week after his last murder, his trial quickly became a media sensation. It was the first murder trial to be fully televised and featured Bundy front and center acting as one of his own defense attorneys. He became a media star, welcoming journalists to his cell, receiving letters of admiration from Lovelorn fans, and even marrying one of them, and providing an endless list of clues about additional murders he may have committed in the hopes of delaying his execution. It didn't work. He was executed in the electric chair in 1989, with the true number of his victims unknown. Number 2 is the Zodiac Killer. A perpetual mystery. This man is an unidentified American serial killer who is believed to have murdered 6 people, primarily in Northern California, between 1966 and 1969. The case inspired the influential 1971 film Dirty Harry, which starred Clint Eastwood, and it was the subject of the critically acclaimed David Fincher's drama Zodiac. The Zodiac Killer's apparent first victim, an 18-year-old college student, was stabbed to death in Riverside, California, in 1966. Although this murder is commonly attributed to the Zodiac Killer, some experts claim it was not committed by him. Soon after the murder, a local newspaper received a letter that provided details of the crime and declared that the victim was neither the first nor the last. In 1968, a teenage couple was shot to death near their car in a remote area north of San Francisco. 1 year later, another couple was attacked in similar circumstances, though the male victim survived. After the 1969 attack, the killer phoned police to alert them to the crime and to take responsibility for the 1968 murders. Later that year, the Zodiac Killer attacked another young couple, though once again the male survived. The last victim, a taxi driver, was shot in October 1969. The murders were the subject of intense investigation and media coverage, particularly because of the killer's taunting letters and phone calls, in which he explained the mystical and intellectual basis of his decision to kill. His letters demonstrated great interest in astrological symbolism and may have reflected the influence of occult religious thought popular in California at the time. Much remains mysterious about the Zodiac case, not least the issue of when the crimes stopped. Crime writer Robert Graysmith has argued that the Zodiac Killer remained active through the 1980s and murdered dozens more people, though this view is controversial. During the 1990s, several investigators claimed to have identified the Zodiac Killer. The suspect most often cited was Arthur Lee Allen, a Vallejo, California, schoolteacher who had been institutionalized in 1975 for child molestation, though his identification with the Zodiac Killer has never been substantiated. And title for the most mysterious serial killer goes to Jack the Ripper. There are over 100 possible suspects. Before we start talking about Jack the Ripper, here are some interesting facts about him. All the murders were committed during late hours of the night and during weekends. The killer was daring enough to send letters to the local news agency and the police, mocking them at their inability to catch him. He got the name of Jack the Ripper from one of the letters which he had sent to the Central News Agency on 27 September, 1888. He signed the letter as Jack the Ripper, which earned him the infamous name. All his victims were females who were prostitutes. He never killed anyone other than a prostitute. In the letters, the killer mentioned about how he killed the women and what was going to be his next plan of action. He mentioned himself as Saucy Jack in one of these letters. Let's move on to his biography now. In 1888, London's Whitechapel district was gripped by reports of a vicious serial killer stalking the city streets. The unidentified madman lured prostitutes into darkened squares and side streets before slitting their throats and sadistically mutilating their bodies with a carving knife. That summer and fall, 5 victims were found butchered in the downtrodden East End district, sparking a media frenzy and citywide manhunt. A number of letters were allegedly sent by the killer to the London Metropolitan Police Service, also known as Scotland Yard, taunting officers about his gruesome activities and speculating on murders to come. Without modern forensic techniques, Victorian police were at a loss in investigating the Ripper's heinous crimes. After taking his final victim in November, the killer seemed to disappear like a ghost. The case was finally closed in 1892, but Jack the Ripper has remained an enduring source of fascination. The most popular theories suggest that the killer's understanding of anatomy and vivisection meant he was possibly a butcher or a surgeon. Over 100 possible suspects have been proposed. If you know of another vicious serial killer, please write down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe to the channel to get all the notifications about new videos. Thanks for watching.